Love doesn't always arrive with a grand gesture or under perfect circumstances. Sometimes it sneaks up on us in the most unexpected moments, like when a man stumbles upon a woman at her most vulnerable and sees something in her that he can't forget. This isn't a story about power or wealth alone. It's about a moment that changes everything. A man who has everything he could ever want, except love. A woman who is just trying to make it through her day without complications. Neither of them expected this encounter, but fate had other plans. In the corporate world, people are expected to be polished, professional, and composed. But in private moments, away from the boardrooms and business meetings, their true selves emerge. And sometimes those raw, unfiltered moments become the ones that matter most. This is the story of how one accidental encounter changed two lives forever. Have you ever had an unexpected moment that completely changed your perspective on someone? Drop your stories in the comments. While we dive into the story, the glass walls of Hawk Enterprises gleamed under the golden glow of the setting sun, a towering monument to power and precision. Up in the penthouse office, Nathaniel King sat behind his desk, the city sprawling beneath him like a chessboard he'd already won. Billionaire, CEO, and a man who could silence a room with a glance. Nathaniel didn't just run this empire, he was the empire. People didn't negotiate with him, they obeyed. Distractions didn't exist in his world. And love? That was a fairy tale for people who had time to waste. Nathaniel didn't. "Cancel my dinner meeting with the investors," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes fixed on the horizon. His assistant, Mark, stood frozen near the door, clutching a tablet. "But sir, they flew in from London just for—" "Reschedule," Nathaniel snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't repeat myself." Mark's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." He turned on his heel and scurried out, the door clicking shut behind him. No one dared challenge Nathaniel King. He decided who stayed, who left, and who never got a second chance. His rules were ironclad, his control absolute. But control, as Nathaniel would soon learn, could slip through even the tightest grip. In less than 24 hours, his perfectly ordered world would tilt off its axis, and it would all begin with a single careless mistake. Downstairs in the buzzing heart of Hawk Enterprises, Isabel Carter was fighting a different kind of battle. It was her first week on the job, and she was already over it. Office politics? Pointless. Billionaire egos? Irrelevant. She was here to work, not to play games. The coffee machine hummed as she poured herself a cup, her fingers pressing into her temples to fend off a growing headache. "Rough morning?" a voice chirped beside her. Isabel glanced over to see Sophia, one of the receptionists, leaning against the counter with a playful grin. Her blonde curls bounced as she tilted her head. "You have no idea," Isabel muttered, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "My office isn't even ready yet, so they've shoved me into some temporary closet near the executive wing. The air up there feels like it's judging me." Sophia laughed, a light musical sound. "That's because Nathaniel King's up there. The man doesn't have a heart, just a spreadsheet where his soul should be." Isabel smirked, setting her cup down. "Well, lucky for me, I have no intention of ever crossing paths with him. I'll do my job, clock out, and be gone before he even knows I'm here." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her grin widening. Famous last words. Isabel rolled her eyes and grabbed her bag, heading for the elevator. She didn't believe in fate or cosmic jokes. She believed in deadlines and competence. But somewhere in the vast clockwork machine of Hawk Enterprises, a tiny gear was slipping. An email had gone out, an innocent scheduling update with one fatal flaw. A room number typed wrong, a single digit off. And that was all it took to set two strangers on a collision course. Upstairs, Nathaniel stepped out of his office, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. His expression was a mask, cool, unreadable, always 5 steps ahead. But today, something gnawed at him, a faint itch he couldn't place. He brushed it off. Feelings were a luxury he didn't indulge. He had a meeting with his board of directors, and he moved toward it with the precision of a predator stalking prey. The designated room was just ahead, or so he thought. He gripped the handle and pushed the door open. What he saw stopped him dead. Isabel froze mid-motion, her breath catching in her throat. She'd been halfway through changing, her blouse unbuttoned, her blazer tossed over a chair, when the door swung wide. And there, filling the frame, was Nathaniel King. The Nathaniel King. His piercing gray eyes locked onto hers, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them. Her pulse hammered as she clutched her blouse shut, heat flooding her face. "Excuse me?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. For the first time in years, maybe ever, he was speechless. He blinked, glancing at the door, then back at her. He stopped frowning. This wasn't his office. This wasn't the meeting room. So why was he here? And why couldn't he move? Isabel yanked her blazer off the chair and pulled it over herself, her glare scorching. "If you're done staring, could you leave?" He should have turned around. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to shut this down before it became something. But Nathaniel didn't budge. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his gaze narrowing as he studied her. There was defiance in her stance, fire in her eyes, something raw and unguarded that he hadn't seen in years. People cowered before him, bent to his will. She didn't. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice low, testing her. Isabel crossed her arms, unflinching. "I don't care who you are. This is my space and you're trespassing. Get out." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. "Your space?" He tilted his head, his tone cool but edged with curiosity. "This is my building." "Then maybe you should learn where your own rooms are," she shot back, stepping closer despite herself. "Or do billionaires not bother with details?" His eyes darkened, but not with anger, something else. He didn't know what it was, and that unsettled him more than anything. Nathaniel King didn't lose control. He didn't linger. And yet, here he was, rooted to the spot, trading barbs with a woman he'd never met. Outside, Mark's voice broke the standoff, muffled but urgent. Sir, the board of directors is waiting. The London investors, they're asking for you." Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't even turn. His focus stayed on Isabel, her flushed cheeks, her steady glare. She didn't back down, didn't flinch. Most people crumbled under his gaze. She didn't. "Who are you?" he asked, quieter this time, almost to himself. Isabel straightened, her chin lifting. "Someone who doesn't have time for this." "Now, are you leaving, or do I need to call security on the guy who owns the place?" A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. Unintentional, unfamiliar. He stepped back, finally breaking the invisible thread between them. "This isn't over," he said, though he wasn't sure why. "It never started," she replied, her voice firm. He turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. But as he moved down the hall, Mark trailing nervously at his side, Nathaniel's mind stayed in that room. Who was she? Why had he stayed? And why did he feel like he'd just lost a game he didn't know he was playing? Back inside, Isabel sank into the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned her blouse. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She'd just faced down Nathaniel King and won. Or had she? The look in his eyes lingered in her mind, sharp and searching, like he'd seen something in her she didn't even know was there. Down the hall, Mark was practically jogging to keep up with Nathaniel's long stride. Nathaniel's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he strode down the corridor, each step sharp and deliberate, a rhythm he'd perfected over years of commanding every room he entered. But today his mind didn't match the precision of his movements. It churned, restless, looping back to a moment he couldn't shake. Her voice, sharp, unflinching, echoed in his head. "If you're done staring, could you leave?" He clenched his jaw, shoving the memory aside. He didn't hesitate. He didn't get distracted. And yet, here he was, replaying that encounter like some lovesick fool who'd lost his edge. It was absurd. He was Nathaniel King, CEO, billionaire, A man who bent the world to his will. One accidental meeting shouldn't have lodged itself under his skin like this. Back in that temporary office, Isabel let out a long breath, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could steady the wild thumping beneath her ribs. Her fingers shook, not from fear, she told herself firmly, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Nathaniel King had walked in on her half-dressed, stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and then refused to leave until she'd forced him out. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to barge back in, and a shiver raced down her spine. This wasn't over. She didn't know how she knew, but she felt it. A quiet certainty that whatever had just happened wasn't the end. Hours later, Isabel shoved through the glass doors of the company lounge, desperate for a break. Her nerves still buzzed from the morning, and all she wanted was a quiet corner to sip her coffee and forget the whole thing. But peace wasn't in the cards. There, by the espresso machine, stood Nathaniel. He didn't look up at first, his movements calm and precise as he stirred his coffee, but his presence filled the room like a storm cloud you couldn't ignore. Isabel froze mid-step, her breath catching. Was this a coincidence? Or had he tracked her down? She squared her shoulders, refusing to let him see her falter. If he thought she'd cower, he'd underestimated her. "Busy day, Mr. King?" she asked, her tone light as she crossed to the coffee maker, pouring herself a cup with deliberate nonchalance. Nathaniel's head tilted slightly, his gray eyes sliding to meet hers. "Eventful," he said, his voice smooth but clipped. She smirked, leaning against the counter. "Oh. Anything interesting happened?" His gaze sharpened, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse skip. "Nothing worth discussing," he replied, cool and dismissive. But the way he held her stare said otherwise. Something flickered there, a crack in his perfect armor. Silence stretched between them, heavy and taut, like a wire pulled too tight. Isabel sipped her coffee, refusing to blink first. Neither of them moved, each waiting for the other to break. Finally, Nathaniel spoke, his voice lower now, almost curious. "You work here?" She arched a brow, setting her cup down. "Why? Planning to fire me?" A faint twitch tugged at his lips, not quite a smile, but close. "No," he said, pausing as if weighing his next words. "Just curious." He turned to leave, his coffee still in hand, but that one word lingered in the air like a challenge. Curious about what? Isabel watched him go, his broad shoulders cutting a sharp line through the lounge. Her heartbeat stayed steady, but her thoughts spun. She should let this go. Wipe him from her mind. She'd survived her first week at Hawk Enterprises by keeping her head down, and she didn't need Nathaniel King, or anyone, derailing that. But as much as she wanted to believe she could forget him, a small, stubborn part of her knew she wouldn't. Up in his penthouse office, Nathaniel sank into his chair, his fingers drumming restlessly against the polished desk. A stack of contracts sat untouched, deals worth millions waiting for his signature, but his focus drifted. He had a company to run, a reputation to uphold. So why did his mind keep circling back to her? Was it the way she'd stood her ground, throwing his own authority back in his face? "This is my building," he'd said, and she'd countered without missing a beat. "Then maybe you should learn where your own rooms are." No one talked to him like that. No one dared. And yet she had, without a flicker of fear. He leaned back, staring out at the city skyline. Maybe it was her defiance that hooked him, or the way she didn't shrink under his gaze like everyone else. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that, for the first time in years, he hadn't been in control. His jaw tightened at the thought. It didn't matter. He wouldn't let it matter. Nathaniel King didn't get distracted, didn't let anyone close enough to throw him off balance. He'd built his life on discipline, on power, and he wasn't about to let one sharp-tongued stranger change that. A soft ping broke his reverie. An internal company message flashed on his screen. He clicked it without thinking, expecting another update from Mark or a report from the board. Instead, her name stared back at him. Isabel Carter. His breath caught just for a second, before he schooled his expression. She was listed under a mandatory company project, a high-stakes initiative requiring one-on-one meetings with senior executives. With him. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. Downstairs, Isabel sat at her temporary desk, scrolling through her inbox with half her attention. Her phone buzzed on the table and she glanced at it. A calendar update. She tapped it open, expecting a routine meeting or a deadline shift. Instead, her stomach dropped. Her next scheduled meeting was with Nathaniel King. Her pulse spiked, her fingers tightening around the phone. She stared at the screen, the words blurring as her mind raced. Was this really a coincidence? Or had he orchestrated this somehow, pulling strings she couldn't see? She set the phone down, forcing herself to breathe. Get a grip, she muttered, rubbing her temples. He's just a guy, a ridiculously rich, ridiculously arrogant guy. But the memory of his voice, low, deliberate, saying, "This isn't over," crept back in, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd meant it. She grabbed her coffee, taking a long sip to steady herself. Whatever this was, she'd handle it. She always did. Back in his office, Nathaniel closed the email, his fingers still hovering over the keyboard. He should cancel the meeting, reassign her to someone else. Keep her out of his orbit and his head. But instead, he sat there staring at the empty screen, the decision hanging in the air. Curious, he'd told her, and now he wondered if that curiosity was a mistake. He didn't do feelings, he didn't chase. And yet, here he was, teetering on the edge of something he couldn't name. Across the building, Isabel's phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Sophia. "So, did you survive the King encounter?" Isabel hesitated, then typed back, "Barely. He showed up in the lounge. Now I've got a meeting with him." Sophia's reply came fast. "What? You're kidding. He's got it out for you, or he's obsessed." Isabel snorted, texting back, "He's just a control freak. I'm not worried." But as she hit send, her eyes drifted to the calendar update still glowing on her screen, and a tiny voice in her head whispered, "You sure about that?" Nathaniel stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The city glittered below, a kingdom he'd built brick by brick. He didn't lose focus, not for anyone. But her face flashed in his mind, those fierce eyes, that quick tongue, and his hand curled into a fist. "Enough," he said aloud, his voice cutting through the silence. He'd see her at the meeting, keep it professional, and bury whatever this was. That was the plan. Isabel, meanwhile, shoved her phone into her bag and stood, smoothing her blazer. She'd face him again, and she'd be ready. No nerves, no second-guessing, just business. But as she headed for the elevator, her steps faltered, and she glanced back at her desk, at that calendar update, like it was a warning she couldn't quite ignore. 40 minutes ago, Nathaniel had walked out of her office, and Isabel had thought that was the end. Now, as the day stretched on, their paths were tangled again, pulled together by a project neither had chosen. And whether they liked it or not, something had started. Something neither could outrun. What do you think? Is Nathaniel really just curious, or is he already falling for Isabel? And how would you handle that meeting if you were her? Drop your predictions in the comments. I can't wait to hear them. Nathaniel King had built his life on focus, a steel trap of a mind that never wavered. Not through hostile takeovers, not through billion-dollar deals, not through anything. Until now. Meetings dragged on, voices fading into a dull hum as his thoughts slipped elsewhere. Contracts piled up on his desk, signatures waiting, but his pen hovered motionless. High-stakes negotiations unfolded in front of him, and he nodded at the right moments, but his attention wasn't there. It was on her, Isabel Carter. The way she'd stood her ground in that cramped office, blouse clutched tight, her voice slicing through his usual control. "If you're done staring, could you leave?" He could still hear it, crisp and defiant, and it gnawed at him. Ridiculous. He barely knew her. She was just another name on a payroll he signed off on every month. But deep down, a quiet, nagging truth simmered. That was a lie. And the worst part? He suspected she saw right through him, too. Isabel had made up her mind the second she'd left the lounge after their last encounter. Nathaniel King was a blip, a fleeting mistake she wouldn't let balloon into something more. She'd clawed her way into Hawk Enterprises with grit and determination, and she wasn't about to let some smug CEO who hadn't even known she existed until he'd barged into her space derail her. So she did what made sense. She avoided him. She mapped out new routes to her desk, zigzagging through back hallways to dodge the executive wing. She timed her coffee runs to miss his usual breaks, steering clear of the lounge when she knew he might be there. She memorized the elevator patterns, slipping in only when she was sure he wasn't around. Avoiding Nathaniel King should have been simple, but it wasn't. The man was everywhere. At first, she brushed it off as bad luck. A random crossing in the hallway, his tall frame striding past, his eyes flicking to hers for a split second before he moved on. Then it happened again, in the break room, his shoulder brushing the air near hers as he reached for a mug. Then, by the elevators, his voice low as he spoke to Mark, but his gaze catching hers across the lobby. Coincidence, she told herself. She was imagining things. But the pattern kept repeating, and each time it wasn't just his presence that rattled her. It was how he looked at her. Not bold or obvious, but subtle, deliberate, like he was studying her every move. Her pulse would jump, and she'd curse herself for it. She wasn't paranoid. Was she? Then she started noticing the whispers. A group of assistants huddled by the copier, their voices dropping as she passed. Did you see him in the lounge yesterday? He never lingers like that. A quick glance from Sophia across the reception desk, paired with a knowing grin. He's been by the elevators every morning this week, right when you're there. Even Mark, flustered and fumbling with his tablet, had shot her a curious look after Nathaniel barked an order to reschedule something. The pieces clicked together and Isabel's stomach twisted. It wasn't in her head. They saw it too. The office was buzzing and she was at the center of it whether she liked it or not. Their first real conversation after that initial clash couldn't be avoided forever. It was inevitable, like a storm you could feel building in the air. When it happened, it hit hard. Isabel had braced herself, running through every possible exchange in her mind. She'd keep it cool, professional, untouchable. But the second their eyes locked, outside the conference room of all places, her carefully rehearsed calm evaporated. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, sharper than she'd meant, her arms crossing tight over her chest. Nathaniel raised a brow, his hands sliding into his pockets as he stepped closer. "I work here," he said, his tone dry but laced with something else. Amusement, maybe. "You?" she huffed, shifting her weight. "Don't play dumb. You've been everywhere I am lately. It's getting old." His lips twitched, that almost smile she was starting to recognize. "Funny," he said, his voice dropping lower. I could say the same about you." Her eyes narrowed, heat creeping up her neck. "I'm not the one stalking people around the office." "Stalking?" He tilted his head, stepping just close enough that she could smell the faint cedar of his cologne. "That's a strong word. I'd call it coincidence." "Right," she shot back, refusing to step away even as her heart thudded. "And I'd call it annoying." He didn't flinch, didn't back off. Instead, he studied her, his gaze steady and unreadable. "You're not wrong," he said after a beat, "but you're not exactly making it easy to stay away." Her breath caught and she hated herself for it. "Try harder," she said, her voice firm despite the wobble she felt inside. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. "Why do you keep running?" he asked, quieter now, almost genuine. She spun back, glaring. "I'm not running, I'm working. Something you should try sometime." That earned her a real smile. Small, fleeting, but there. "I work plenty," he said, his tone lighter. "Maybe you're the distraction." She opened her mouth to argue, then clamped it shut. He was baiting her, and she wouldn't bite. "Keep telling yourself that," she muttered, brushing past him. But as she walked away, she felt his eyes on her, and the air between them crackled with something she couldn't name. It infuriated her. Worse, a tiny, traitorous part of her wasn't sure she minded. Nathaniel King was a legend at Hawk Enterprises. Ruthless, unshakable, a machine of efficiency. Lingering glances? Coffee breaks that lasted too long? Showing up wherever one specific employee happened to be? That wasn't him. Until now. And the office couldn't stop talking about it. Did you see how he looked at her by the elevators? One accountant whispered to another over lunch. He's never cared about anyone's schedule before. Why is he always around her? A marketing assistant murmured in the break room. I swear, I saw him smile. Smile when she snapped at him yesterday, Sophia confided to a coworker, her eyes wide. The rumor spread fast, a current of gossip rippling through cubicles and corridors. Nathaniel heard it all, the hushed voices, the sidelong glances. He didn't care. Let them talk. His focus was elsewhere, tangled up in a woman who seemed determined to push him away. But Isabel? Every whisper, every smirk, every, "Oh, you're the one he's after." Look from her coworkers lit a fire under her resolve. She wouldn't be the punchline to some office soap opera. She wouldn't let Nathaniel King or anyone turn her into a story. Whatever this was, this strange pull between them, it had to stop. Now, that's what she told herself anyway, as she dodged another hallway where she'd spotted his familiar silhouette. But fate didn't care about her plans. Nathaniel didn't either. He leaned against his office window, arms crossed, staring out at the city he'd conquered. His mind should have been on the merger meeting in an hour, but it wasn't. It was on her, on the way she'd challenged him, on the spark in her eyes when she'd told him to try harder. "Maybe you're the distraction," he'd said, and he'd meant it as a jab, but now he wondered if it was true. He straightened, shaking his head. This was nothing, a fluke. He'd see her at that project meeting, keep it strictly business, and move on. Isabel, meanwhile, sat at her desk, her fingers tapping restlessly against her keyboard. She'd avoided him all day, but the calendar reminder loomed. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Nathaniel King. Her stomach flipped, and she shoved the feeling down. "It's just a meeting," she muttered, grabbing her water bottle and taking a long sip. "He's just a guy." But as she glanced at the clock, then at the door, a question lingered. If it was nothing, why did it feel like everything was about to change? 40 minutes ago, she'd walked away from him outside the conference room, determined to keep her distance. Now, as the workday wound down, the space between them felt smaller than ever, charged with a tension neither could ignore. And whether they admitted it or not, something was shifting, something big. Is it fate pulling Nathaniel and Isabel together, or just stubborn curiosity? If you were Isabel, would you confront him head-on or keep dodging him? The whispers at Hawk Enterprises had grown from quiet murmurs to a steady hum, impossible to ignore. What started as fleeting glances and hushed guesses had exploded into full-on gossip, a current rippling through every cubicle and corridor. Nathaniel King, the untouchable CEO, was acting different. In a company where routine was sacred and everyone knew their place, his shift was a crack in the foundation. "Did you see how he watched her in that meeting last week?" one assistant muttered over a stack of files. "He's never lingered in the break room before. Now he's there every time she is," a junior exec whispered at the water cooler. "Maybe she's got dirt on him," someone speculated, only for another to cut in with a sly grin. "Or maybe she's just special." Isabel overheard it all, her stomach twisting each time. Special? Ridiculous. She told herself that over and over, a mantra to keep her grounded. Because if she let herself believe anything else, she'd be stepping into dangerous territory. Territory she wasn't ready for. Her resolve faltered the moment she opened her inbox that morning. The usual emails blinked at her. Project updates, deadlines, reports she'd skimmed a dozen times. But at the top, one stood out. No subject, no sender, just a blank line and a single sentence. "Stay away from him." Her heart thudded, loud enough she swore the whole floor could hear it. She stared at the screen, her coffee growing cold in her hand. A prank? Some coworker's idea of a joke? Or something more? Her finger hovered over the delete key, itching to erase it and pretend it never happened. But she couldn't. Nathaniel was too big, too powerful for anyone to think she, of all people, could sway him. So why the warning? And who cared enough to send it? The questions gnawed at her, sharp and persistent, as she shoved her laptop shut and tried to focus on anything else. Nathaniel, meanwhile, sat in a high-stakes meeting, his pen tapping idly against the table. He'd never bothered with office drama. Petty squabbles and power plays were beneath him. Until now. Across the room, a smug project manager was taking credit for Isabel's latest report, his voice grating as he spun her work into his own triumph. Something snapped in Nathaniel, a flare of irritation he couldn't place. Before Isabel could even speak, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "That's interesting," he said, his tone cool but edged with steel. "Because I distinctly remember Isabel handling that project, almost single-handedly." The room went still, every eye darting between them. The manager stammered, then fell silent. Nathaniel didn't blink, didn't soften. His words weren't a question, they were law. Isabel sat frozen, her notes clutched tight. The meeting wrapped up fast after that, people filing out with quick, curious glances her way. She should have been grateful. He'd just handed her a win on a silver platter. But when she looked at him, all she felt was suspicion. "Why'd you do that?" she asked as the room emptied, her voice low but pointed. Nathaniel stood, adjusting his cufflinks with that maddening calm. "Because it was true," he said simply, his gray eyes meeting hers. "And because you deserved it." Her breath hitched just for a second at the quiet weight in his words. She wanted to argue, to push back, but the way he looked at her, steady, unguarded, made her chest tighten. "Thanks," she muttered, turning away before he could see the flush creeping up her neck. He watched her go, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and for once he didn't fight it. The push and pull between them had been building for weeks, a tension that hummed beneath every glance, every word. It couldn't hold forever, and it didn't. Isabel had spent days convincing herself she was nothing to him, a passing amusement, a game for a bored billionaire. So when she overheard him in the hallway, his voice clipped as he spoke to Mark, her worst fears seemed to solidify. "She's just another employee," he'd said, the words sharp and final. She didn't wait for more, didn't linger to catch the rest. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she turned on her heel, nails biting into her palms. Of course, she'd been an idiot to think otherwise, to let herself wonder if those lingering looks meant anything. She walked away, head high but insides churning, vowing to bury whatever flicker of hope she'd let slip through. Nathaniel didn't know what had shifted, but he felt it the next day. 1 minute, there'd been something between them, charged, alive, a thread he couldn't cut. The next, she was gone. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. She brushed past him in the hallway, her shoulders stiff, her eyes fixed ahead like he was invisible. In meetings, she spoke to everyone but him, her voice flat and professional. At the coffee machine, she grabbed her cup and left without a glance. He'd let it slide at first, chalking it up to a bad day. But when it stretched into a week, when she treated him like just another suit instead of the man who'd stood there speechless the first time they'd met, he couldn't ignore it. Uncertainty crept in, a feeling so foreign it left him off balance. Had he misread her? Had he imagined the spark? Was he chasing something that didn't exist? He cornered her one afternoon by the elevators, his patience fraying. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low but firm, blocking her path just enough to make her stop. She crossed her arms, her gaze cold. "Nothing's going on," she said, clipped and final. "I'm doing my job. You should do yours." He frowned, searching her face. "You've been dodging me for days. Why?" She laughed, short and bitter. Not everything's about you, Nathaniel. Maybe I'm just busy. But her eyes flicked away and he caught it, the hurt she couldn't hide. If I did something, he started softer now, tell me. She shook her head, stepping past him. You didn't do anything, that's the point. The elevator doors slid shut behind her, leaving him staring at his own reflection, a rare ache settling in his chest. The office kept buzzing, the gossip louder than ever. He stood up for her in that meeting. Did you see her face? One voice floated from the break room. She's avoiding him now, though. Think she's playing hard to get? Another chimed in. Isabel heard it all, her resolve hardening with every word. She wouldn't be his pawn, his story, his anything. But late that night, alone at her desk, she reopened that anonymous email. Stay away from him, and stared at it until her vision blurred. Who was warning her off, and why did it sting to think they might be right? Nathaniel paced his office, the city lights glinting beyond the glass. He should have let it go. She'd made it clear she wanted distance. But the memory of her, fierce, unguarded, the way she'd looked at him that first day, kept pulling him back. He stopped, running a hand through his hair, and made a decision. The next morning, he found her in the lounge alone, pouring coffee. Isabel, he said, his voice quieter than usual. She stiffened but didn't turn. What? He stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in her shoulders. I don't know what you heard or what you think, but you're wrong. She faced him then, her eyes wary but searching. About what? He hesitated, then took a breath. About me, about this. His hand brushed hers, just a graze, but it sent a jolt through them both. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, Nathaniel King didn't have a plan, just a feeling he couldn't shake. 40 minutes ago, she'd walked away from him in that hallway, convinced she'd figured him out. Now, as his touch lingered in the air between them, Isabel wondered if she'd been wrong and if the biggest mistake wasn't walking away, but not staying to find out. Did Isabel misjudge Nathaniel, or is she right to keep her walls up? And what about that touch? Romance, or just a moment? Isabel's hands shook as she gripped the document, the words blurring under the harsh fluorescent lights of her temporary office. Transfer notice. Effective immediately. Her breath caught, a cold weight settling in her chest. She wasn't naive. She'd seen how the office buzzed around her, how the whispers followed her every step since Nathaniel King started showing up wherever she was. This wasn't random. Someone, HR, a board member, or someone with far more pull than she'd ever have, had decided she was a problem. A clean, quiet way to erase her from Hawk Enterprises, shipping her off to a different branch, a different city, a different life. She stared at the paper, her fingers crumpling the edges. Fighting it was pointless. No one would challenge a move this decisive. Not for a first-week employee like her. Not even Nathaniel, right? Across the building, Nathaniel sat in his penthouse office, the city skyline a glittering backdrop to his unshakable world. Control was his currency. Over his company, his decisions, his emotions. He'd built an empire on it, but when Mark slid the transfer order across his desk, her name bolded at the top, something inside him fractured. His jaw tightened, his pen stilling mid-signature on another contract. Who signed off on this? He asked, his voice low and lethal, cutting through the room like a whip. Mark fumbled with his tablet, sweat beading on his brow. It came from higher up, sir. I don't... Nathaniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. I am the highest authority in this company. Silence swallowed the room, Mark's nervous fidgeting the only sound. Nathaniel snatched the paper, scanning it again. This wasn't routine. Someone wanted her gone. Someone who thought they could pull strings behind his back. He wouldn't let them. He stood, his chair scraping the floor, and barked, "Find out who authorized it." Now. Mark nodded, scrambling out, but Nathaniel's mind was already racing. She'd be packing by now, her desk cleared, her sharp wit and fiercer eyes slipping out of his reach. For the first time in years, a pang of helplessness gripped him. Raw, unfamiliar, and infuriating. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not without a fight. He grabbed his jacket, his pulse hammering as he strode out, a plan forming with every step. He'd stop this, even if it meant breaking every rule he'd ever made for himself. Isabel was halfway through boxing up her things. Files, pens, a chipped coffee mug, when a knock jolted her. Heavy, insistent, it rattled the doorframe. She froze, her heart thudding as she set down a stack of papers. Who'd bother coming now? She hesitated, then crossed the room and pulled the door open. Nathaniel stood there, filling the space with a presence that stole her breath. His tie hung loose, his dark hair slightly mussed, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Nathaniel King, always polished, always composed, was disheveled, and it was because of her. "You can't leave," he said, his voice firm but trembling at the edges, a vulnerability she'd never heard before. She inhaled sharply, gripping the door to steady herself. "I didn't have a choice." He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You do now." Her throat tightened, his nearness stirring something she'd fought to bury. "Nathaniel, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice cracking. A muscle in his jaw flexed, his eyes searching hers. "Making a mistake if I let you walk away." Her heart slammed against her ribs, the air between them electric. "You don't," she started, but he cut her off, his voice raw and unguarded. "I do." Time stretched, heavy with unspoken words, and then he said softer, "I want you to stay." His hand brushed her arm, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a shiver through her, warm and dizzying. She should have felt elated hearing him lay it bare like that, but doubt clawed at her, sharp and relentless. What if this was a fluke? A knee-jerk reaction to losing control, not her? She forced herself to meet his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Why, Nathaniel? Why do you want me to stay?" He frowned, caught off guard. "What?" She pressed on, stepping back to put space between them, though her skin still tingled where he'd touched her. "Is it because I work for you? Because you hate being outmaneuvered? Or something else?" His expression shifted. Not anger, but a dawning clarity. She wasn't testing him. She needed proof, something real. Words alone wouldn't cut it. And in that moment, he knew he had to show her. Nathaniel wasn't a man for theatrics. Grand gestures were for movies, not boardrooms. But for her, he'd rewrite the script. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Put the board on," he said when Mark answered, his tone clipped. Isabel's brows furrowed as the call connected, voices crackling through the speaker. Confused, impatient executives caught mid-argument. "What's this about, Nathaniel?" one demanded. He ignored them, stepping closer to her, the phone held between them like a lifeline. "The transfer order for Isabel Carter is void, effective immediately." Silence roared on the other end, thick and stunned. "If anyone has a problem with that," he continued, his voice steel, "you're welcome to leave my company." A beat passed, then weak murmurs of agreement trickled through, apologies stumbling over each other. He ended the call with a tap, tossing the phone onto her desk and turned to her. "I meant every word." Her breath hitched, her mind reeling. He'd just dismantled a decision from his own board, publicly, recklessly, for her. She had no comeback, no shield left. For the first time, she believed him. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He closed the gap between them, his hand lifting to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with a tenderness that made her heart stutter. "Yes, I did," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I couldn't let you go. Not without you knowing what you mean to me." Her eyes fluttered shut, the warmth of him overwhelming, and she leaned into his touch, the doubt melting away. The room felt smaller, the world shrinking to just them. "What do I mean to you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost afraid of the answer. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his gray eyes unguarded, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "Everything I didn't know I needed," he said. And then he kissed her. Slow, deliberate, a promise wrapped in every press of his lips. She melted into it, her hands finding his chest, the steady thump of his heart under her palms grounding her. When they parted, breathless, he smiled, a real, rare smile that lit up his face. "Stay," he whispered against her lips. She nodded, a quiet laugh escaping her. "I will." 40 minutes ago, she'd been ready to walk away, convinced she was just another name on his roster. Now, as his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close in a hug that felt like home, Isabel knew she'd been wrong. This wasn't a goodbye, it was a beginning. Have you ever had someone fight for you like Nathaniel did for Isabel? Or walked away from something you later regretted? Isabel stood in Nathaniel's office the morning after his grand gesture, her arms crossed, her resolve firm. His confession still echoed in her mind, raw, real, and enough to keep her here, but she wasn't about to let it blur the lines she'd fought to draw. "I'm staying," she said, her voice steady as she met his gaze across the desk. "But I'm not here to be the CEO's girlfriend who gets handed everything on a platter. I earned my spot at Hawk Enterprises, and if people start whispering about favors or shortcuts, I'm out." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his arms folding over his chest, a flicker of amusement in his gray eyes. "So you're saying I should act like you're just another employee? Pretend I don't care?" She lifted her chin, unflinching. "I'm saying respect me as a professional. Treat me like I belong here because of my work, not because of you. If you can't, we're done before we start." He studied her for a long moment, the silence thick with challenge. Then he nodded, his voice smooth and certain. "Fine, no special treatment." She narrowed her eyes, waiting for the catch until his lips curved into a slow, knowing smirk. "But outside this building," he added, his tone dropping lower, "you're mine." Her stomach flipped, a rush of warmth flooding her despite herself. She rolled her eyes to cover it, turning for the door. "We'll see about that," she tossed back. But his low chuckle followed her out, lingering in her ears like a promise she couldn't shake. Days turned into weeks, and Nathaniel kept his word. Mostly. At work, he was the picture of professionalism. He didn't hover, didn't pull her aside, didn't give her assignments that screamed favoritism. But the little things slipped through, impossible to miss. The way his gaze softened when she spoke in meetings, a quiet pride flickering in his eyes. How he'd linger just a beat longer by the coffee machine when she was there, his shoulder brushing hers as he reached for a mug. The time her printer jammed, and he appeared out of nowhere with a spare ream of paper, handing it over without a word before walking off. Her coworkers noticed. Oh, they noticed, but no one could pin anything concrete on him. "He's different around her," Sophia muttered to a receptionist one afternoon. "Not obvious, but it's there." Isabel heard it all and kept her head down, determined to prove she belonged. Outside the office, though, Nathaniel was relentless in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't flashy dinners or smooth one-liners that chipped away at her walls. It was the moments she couldn't prepare for. One evening, after a grueling day of deadlines, she opened her apartment door to find him standing there, tie loosened, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. In his hand was a book, a rare edition of a novel she'd mentioned once, months ago, in a throwaway comment about her college days. She stared at it, then at him, her voice catching. "How did you even—" He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe with that easy confidence. "I pay attention." Her fingers brushed the worn cover, her chest tightening as she clutched it close. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly, looking up at him. He stepped inside, closing the distance between them, his hand finding hers. "I wanted to," he murmured, his thumb tracing circles on her skin, sending a shiver up her arm. You're worth it. She didn't pull away, letting his warmth seep into her. You're impossible, she said, but her smile betrayed her, and he grinned back, tugging her closer. You like it, he teased, his lips brushing her forehead in a kiss so gentle it stole her breath. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, the steady beat of his heart grounding her. In that quiet moment, she knew. This wasn't just sparks or fleeting glances. He saw her, really saw her, and it shifted something deep inside. The company gala came faster than she'd expected, a swirl of lights and chatter filling the grand ballroom. Isabel slipped away from the crowd, needing a breather, and found herself in an empty lounge, adjusting her dress in front of a mirror. The door swung open behind her, and she turned, half expecting Sophia with a glass of wine and a quip. Instead, Nathaniel stepped in, his tuxedo sharp but his expression softer than she'd ever seen. Time stuttered, a rush of déjà vu hitting her. The first time he'd walked in on her, all shock and tension. Now, though, she didn't flinch. She arched a brow, her lips curving. Do you ever knock, Mr. King, or is walking into the wrong rooms just your thing? He smirked, crossing the room with that slow, deliberate stride she'd come to know. Only when you're in them, he said, his voice low and warm. Heat curled through her, her pulse quickening as he stopped in front of her. You're not running this time, he said, his hand lifting to brush her cheek, his fingers lingering there. She tilted her head, meeting his gaze. I have no reason to. His eyes darkened with something tender, and he leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that started soft but deepened fast, hungry and sure. Her hand slid up his chest, gripping his lapels as she kissed him back, the world fading to just the two of them. When they pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, a quiet laugh escaping him. I've wanted to do that all night, he admitted, his voice rough. She smiled, her fingers tracing his jaw. You could have just said so. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, his lips warm against her skin. Where's the fun in that? He teased, pulling her into his arms, her back against his chest as they stood there, swaying slightly to the distant music filtering in. She closed her eyes, letting herself sink into him, the weight of his arms a comfort she hadn't known she craved. Love didn't always show up on schedule. It barged in, messy and unplanned, catching you off guard. For Isabel, it had started with a mistake. A door swung wide, and a man she'd never expected to need. For Nathaniel, it was a woman who'd challenged him, seen through him, and stayed. This wasn't just a fluke or a fleeting thrill. It was real, solid, a beginning carved out of chaos. As he held her close, his breath warm against her neck, she knew. Some accidents were meant to happen, and this one had changed everything. Do you believe love at first sight can grow into something lasting, or is it just a spark that fades? Share your thoughts in the comments, and please subscribe for more stories like this.